Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Jeremy. I'm 38, a construction supervisor from a small town in Indiana, and up until a couple of months ago, life was simple, hard but simple. Then everything changed overnight when I won the lottery. Yeah, $52 million. I'll admit it, at first, I was ecstatic. Who wouldn't be? It felt like all my worries disappeared in one breath. No more stressing about bills, no more saving every penny for a rainy day. My wife, Nora, and I had been together for 12 years. She was my rock, or at least I thought she was. The day I found out about the win, I rushed home to tell her. The look on her face when I showed her the ticket, man, she lit up like a Christmas tree. We were hugging, laughing, even crying a little. It felt like our lives were finally on the up and up. At first, it was everything you'd imagine. We paid off the mortgage on our modest home, got my mom, Sadie, a new car, and even started looking at ways to invest the money smartly. I thought we were on the same page, focused on family and staying grounded. But looking back, I should have noticed how quickly Nora started changing. It started small. She insisted on upgrading her wardrobe. Nothing wrong with that, I thought. We could afford it now, after all. Then came the spa days, the weekly salon appointments, and the sudden fascination with high-end brands she used to call ridiculous. She'd laugh it off when I asked her about it, saying she was just enjoying herself for the first time in years. Things escalated when Gerald entered the picture. He's a local real estate developer, slick, always dressed in sharp suits, and always too eager to give Nora attention. Gerald came to us with investment opportunities. He had a way of making everything sound like the deal of the century, and Nora ate it up. She said it was the chance to make our money grow, to really live. I wasn't sure about him. Something about the guy felt off, but Nora called me paranoid. I started to feel like I didn't know my own wife. She stopped coming to family dinners, saying they were too small town. I'd catch her on the phone, laughing and whispering in the other room. When I asked her who it was, she'd get defensive, brushing me off like I was being controlling. I didn't push too hard. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe we were still the same Jeremy and Nora we'd always been. But one night, I overheard her talking to someone on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but her voice was sharp, different. She was talking about me, about how I was holding her back. That was like a punch to the gut. I didn't say anything that night, but my gut told me something wasn't right. I tried to bring it up gently the next day. I told her I was feeling distant, that maybe we needed to spend more time together, just the two of us. She gave me this tight smile and said, "Jeremy, don't be so dramatic. Everything's fine. Just let me breathe a little, okay?" Maybe I was being naive, but I wanted to trust her. I didn't know then just how deep things were about to go. After that conversation with Nora, I tried to push my doubts aside. Maybe I was overthinking it, I told myself. But the signs kept piling up. Nora was spending less and less time at home. When she was there, it was like she wasn't really present, always on her phone or scrolling through luxury vacation spots online. She started mentioning trips to Paris or Dubai like they were casual weekend getaways. The thing is, I've always been a simple guy. My idea of a good time is grilling out with family, maybe watching the Colts game with a beer in hand. I thought Nora liked that about me, about us. But lately, it was like everything about our life embarrassed her. She even suggested selling our house and moving to the city. "We can afford something nicer," she'd say. But I loved our home. It wasn't much, but it was ours. I told her I wasn't ready for a change like that, and she rolled her eyes and muttered, "You're so stuck in your ways." Around this time, Gerald started showing up more. At first, it was just business. He'd come by to talk investments or pitch some new real estate project. He was charming, I'll give him that, too charming. But then, I noticed he wasn't just showing up for business. One evening, I came home from visiting Mom and found him in our kitchen, drinking wine with Nora. She laughed a little too hard at something he said, and I felt my stomach twist. "Hey Gerald," I said, keeping my tone even. "Didn't realize we were hosting guests." Nora waved it off like it was no big deal. "He just stopped by to drop off some paperwork," she said. Gerald flashed me that slick grin and added, "I was just telling Nora how lucky you both are. With the right investments, this lottery win could triple." I didn't respond. I just nodded and grabbed a beer from the fridge, but inside, I was seething. Why was this guy in my house when I wasn't around? And why was Nora so comfortable with it? That night, I told her I wasn't comfortable with Gerald hanging around when I wasn't home. She blew up. "What, I'm not allowed to have friends now," she snapped. "You're being ridiculous, Jeremy. He's helping us with our future." "Our future?" I shot back. "Feels like he's more interested in spending time with you." She scoffed, calling me jealous and insecure. "Maybe you should focus on yourself instead of trying to control me," she said, walking off to the bedroom and slamming the door. I spent that night on the couch, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I started wondering if I'd made a mistake by buying that lottery ticket in the first place. A week later, things got worse. I'd just gotten home from work when I found a letter in the mail from some law office. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I opened it, my heart sank. It was a notice about transferring the ownership of our house, something about refinancing. The strange part? My name wasn't anywhere on it. Confused, I confronted Nora. She didn't even flinch. "Oh, that's just something Gerald suggested. He said it's a better way to protect our assets." "Our assets? This house was ours before the lottery, Nora. Why would we need to protect it now?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She shrugged, brushing past me. "You wouldn't understand. Gerald said it's a smart move." That's when I knew for sure, this wasn't just about investments. Gerald wasn't just some helpful advisor. He had his claws in her, and she was letting him. I'm not proud of what happened next, but I lost my temper. I slammed the letter on the counter and told her I was done letting Gerald call the shots in our marriage. "If you want to let him play puppet master, fine. But don't expect me to stand by and watch." Her response? She grabbed her keys and left. Didn't say where she was going, just stormed out like I was the one in the wrong. I sat there for hours, waiting for her to come back. She didn't. When she finally walked in around 2 a.m., she reeked of wine and perfume. I asked her where she'd been, but she ignored me and went straight to bed. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. After Nora stormed out that night and came back reeking of wine and Gerald's influence, I knew I had to figure out what was really going on. Part of me wanted to believe this was just a phase, that she'd come back to her senses, but deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I decided to check the house documents Gerald had convinced her to sign. It took me a while to piece it together. Contracts and legal jargon aren't exactly my strong suit, but with the help of my buddy Carl, who used to work in finance, we discovered something horrifying. The papers gave Gerald control over not just the house, but also a significant chunk of our lottery winnings. It was written in a way that disguised it as asset management, but essentially, Gerald had maneuvered to take ownership of our home and access to our money. I confronted Nora about it right away. I showed her the documents and explained what they meant, hoping she'd finally realize how this guy was manipulating her. But instead of admitting she'd been duped, she doubled down. "You don't understand how these things work, Jeremy," she said with that same dismissive tone that was starting to feel like a knife in my gut. "Gerald knows what he's doing. He's trying to help us." "Help us?" I shot back, barely keeping my voice steady. "Nora, he's stealing from us. Look at the fine print. He's got control over our house and part of our winnings. How is that helping?" She rolled her eyes. "You're just jealous because Gerald knows how to handle money better than you. Honestly, you should be thanking him." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It felt like I was talking to a stranger. The woman I married, the woman who used to dream about raising kids in this house, who cried happy tears when we paid off the mortgage, was gone. Then she said something that completely broke me. Maybe Gerald is right. Maybe this small-town life isn't for me after all. That was the moment I knew she'd already made her choice. And it wasn't me. A few days later, things escalated again. I came home early from work to find Gerald in my living room. He was standing there like he owned the place, holding a glass of my bourbon and laughing with Nora. I felt my blood boil, but I kept my cool. "What's he doing here?" I asked, my voice cold but calm. Gerald turned to me, all smug confidence. "Just going over some final details. You know, about the house and your investments." "They're not my investments," I snapped, looking directly at Nora. "And Gerald, you've overstayed your welcome. Get out of my house." Nora jumped to his defense. "Jeremy, stop. You're being ridiculous." "No, Nora," I said firmly. This ends now. Gerald, if you don't leave, I'm calling the cops. For a split second, I thought Gerald might actually fight me on it, but then he smirked and set his glass down. I'll go, he said, grabbing his coat. But Jeremy, you should really reconsider. People like me know how to make money work for them. People like you, well, you're better off sticking to construction. That hit a nerve, but I kept my focus. I wasn't going to let this snake get the last word. After he left, I turned to Nora. This is it, Nora. Either you cut ties with him completely, or I'm done. I won't watch you destroy everything we've built together. She stared at me, her jaw tightening. You're giving me an ultimatum, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. Fine, Jeremy. If you want me to choose, I choose Gerald. At least he sees my potential. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. She packed a bag that night and left. I didn't know where she was going, but I had a pretty good guess. Gerald. The next morning, my mom, Sadie, came by. She must have sensed something was wrong because as soon as she walked in, she asked, Jeremy, what's going on? You look like you've been hit by a truck. I broke down and told her everything, about Gerald, the house, and Nora leaving. She didn't say much at first, just hugged me and let me vent. Then she said something that stuck with me. Jeremy, you're stronger than this. You've been through worse, and you'll get through this too. But you've got to protect what's yours. She was right. I couldn't just sit back and let Gerald and Nora take everything. So, I called Carl again and started looking into how to legally untangle Gerald's grip on my life. But while I was focused on the legal fight, I didn't realize how far Gerald was willing to go to take me down. After Nora left, I threw myself into trying to undo the mess she and Gerald had created. With Carl's help, I started filing paperwork to challenge the ownership transfer on the house. It was messy, and it was going to take time, but at least it felt like I was doing something. Meanwhile, Nora was laying low. I didn't hear from her for almost 2 weeks, not even a text to check in. Part of me wanted to call her, to beg her to come back and talk things out, but my pride wouldn't let me. She'd made her choice. Then one day, I got a call from my mom, Sadie. Her voice was shaky, and I could tell she was trying not to cry. Jeremy, honey, I think you need to come over, she said. I found something disturbing. When I got to her house, she handed me an envelope that had been left on her doorstep. Inside were copies of more legal documents, this time claiming that she was trying to sell the house to Gerald. It was absurd. Mom would never do something like that, but her name was on the documents, and the signatures looked convincing. They're fake, I said, more to reassure myself than her. This is Gerald written all over it. Sadie nodded, but her hands were trembling. Jeremy, I think he's trying to scare me, to scare us. That's when it hit me. Gerald wasn't just coming after me, he was going after my family. My blood boiled. Nobody messes with my mom. I promised her I'd handle it and drove straight to Gerald's office, but when I got there, the receptionist told me he wasn't in. I left a message, something to the effect of, "You're going to regret this," and drove home fuming. A few days later, I got a call from Nora. Hearing her voice again sent a mix of anger and sadness rushing through me. She sounded different. Tired, maybe. Jeremy, can we talk? She said. I wanted to hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. About what? It's complicated, she said. Can we meet somewhere? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a coffee shop in town, and when I saw her, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked thinner, worn out. It was clear this wasn't the glamorous life she thought she'd signed up for. Jeremy, she started, fidgeting with her coffee cup. I didn't mean for things to get this far. I folded my arms, waiting for her to continue. I thought Gerald was going to help us. Help me, she said, her voice cracking. But he's not who I thought he was. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Took you long enough to figure that out. She flinched but didn't argue. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Here, she said, sliding it across the table. This is everything I have on him. I thought it might help you. I opened the folder and started flipping through it. Bank statements, emails, contracts. It was a treasure trove of evidence showing how Gerald had been siphoning money from not just me, but other people too. He wasn't just a shady businessman, he was a full-blown con artist. Why are you giving me this? I asked, narrowing my eyes. Nora looked down at her hands. Because I made a mistake, Jeremy. And because he's dangerous. I think he's planning something worse. It wasn't until I got home and started going through the documents that I realized just how deep Gerald's scheme went. He had connections in all the wrong places: lawyers, notaries, even a judge or two. He'd been using forged signatures and bribed witnesses to manipulate contracts for years. And now, it seemed, he was trying to use those same tactics to take everything from me. Then, as I was combing through the files, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "Stay out of this, Jeremy, or you'll regret it." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It didn't take a genius to figure out who it was from. But I wasn't about to back down. If Gerald thought he could scare me into submission, he had another thing coming. The next day, I met with Carl and my attorney Vanessa to figure out our next steps. Vanessa, a sharp and no-nonsense kind of woman, didn't sugarcoat things. "This is going to get ugly," she said, tapping a stack of papers. "Gerald's a pro at covering his tracks. If you want to beat him, you need to be ready for a fight." "I'm ready," I said, though the knot in my stomach suggested otherwise. Vanessa gave me a long look. "Good. Because if what these documents suggest is true, Gerald's not just after your money, he's willing to ruin anyone who gets in his way." Later that night, as I was trying to unwind, my mom called again. This time, she was panicked. "Jeremy, someone broke into the house," she said, her voice shaking. "They didn't take anything, but they left a note." I drove over as fast as I could, and when I got there, Sadie handed me a crumpled piece of paper. Scrawled in messy handwriting were the words, "This is your last warning. Stop, or she pays the price." They meant my mom. That's when I realized, this wasn't just a fight over money anymore. It was war. After that break-in at my mom's house and the threatening note, I knew Gerald wasn't bluffing. He was willing to go to any length to get what he wanted, and now he was targeting my family. I stayed with my mom for a few nights to make sure she was safe, but I felt like I was just waiting for the next shoe to drop. It didn't take long. A few days ago, I got a call from Nora. Her voice was shaky, like she'd been crying. "Jeremy, it's Gerald," she said, barely getting the words out. He took Sadie." I froze. "What do you mean, he took her?" "He said it was to make sure you stop fighting him," Nora said. "I didn't know he'd go this far, Jeremy." I swear I didn't know. I could barely hear her over the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. "Where is she? Did he tell you where he's keeping her?" Nora hesitated. "I don't know. He just told me to tell you to back off or you'll never see her again." I hung up without another word. Panic and anger were coursing through me, but I knew I couldn't let them take over. I called Vanessa, my attorney, and told her what had happened. She was furious. "This isn't just fraud anymore," she said. "This is criminal. We need to go to the police." I knew she was right, but I also knew that involving the cops could escalate things. If Gerald felt cornered, who knew what he'd do to my mom? For the next 24 hours, I felt like I was losing my mind. I barely slept, constantly checking my phone for updates. Finally, Nora called again. "I think I know where he's keeping her," she said. "Where?" I demanded. "There's an old warehouse on the edge of town," she said. "He mentioned it once when he was talking about his properties. I'm not sure, but it's worth checking." I wasn't sure if I could trust her, but I didn't have any other leads. I called Carl, and he agreed to come with me. We grabbed flashlights, a crowbar, and whatever else we could think of that might come in handy. When we got to the warehouse, it was eerily quiet. The place was run down, with broken windows and overgrown weeds surrounding it. We parked a little ways off and approached on foot, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Inside, the place was dark and smelled like mildew. We searched room by room, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. Then we heard it, a faint noise, like someone coughing. We followed the sound to a locked room at the back of the warehouse. "Mom," I called, my voice shaking. "Jeremy." Her voice was muffled but unmistakable. Carl used the crowbar to pry the door open, and there she was, tied to a chair, looking pale but alive. I ran to her and started untying the ropes, my hands shaking. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to hold back tears. She nodded weakly. "I'm fine, Jeremy. Just get me out of here." We were almost out of the building when we heard the sound of tires screeching outside. Gerald's goons had arrived. Carl and I managed to get my mom into the car and out of there before they could catch us, but it was a close call. As I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following us. When we got back to my place, I called Vanessa again and told her everything. "This is it," I said. "I'm done playing nice. Let's take him down." The next step is building a case against Gerald, not just for fraud, but for kidnapping. Vanessa's already reached out to some contacts in law enforcement, and it looks like we've got a solid shot at exposing him. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. Gerald's not the kind of guy to go down without a fight, and I'm worried about what he'll do next. After the warehouse incident, Vanessa moved fast. She filed a report with the police, presenting the forged documents, Nora's folder of evidence, and now the kidnapping as part of Gerald's escalating crimes. It's clear this isn't just about me. Gerald's been running cons for years, using charm and intimidation to ruin lives. Nora has been surprisingly cooperative since the kidnapping. I guess seeing Gerald's true colors shook her up. She's been feeding us information, like names of people he's worked with and places he might go to hide. Part of me still doesn't trust her, but for now, her help is proving useful. Meanwhile, I've had to make some tough decisions. The police advised me to stay low and avoid confrontation, but I couldn't just sit around waiting for them to act. Carl and I tracked down a few of Gerald's associates, and while they were tight-lipped, the fear in their eyes told me one thing: Gerald's empire is starting to crumble. Late last night, I got a call from Vanessa. "We've got enough," she said. "Between the kidnapping, the forgery, and the testimonies we're gathering, Gerald's looking at serious jail time." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. "What's the next step?" I asked. "We bring him in," she said. "But Jeremy, you need to be careful. If Gerald knows the walls are closing in, he might lash out." I didn't need the warning. Gerald's already shown he's willing to play dirty, and I'm not taking any chances with my family's safety. I've beefed up security around my mom's house and started carrying pepper spray, just in case. I'm trying to stay strong, but the stress is getting to me. Nights are the worst. Every little noise makes me jump, and I can't shake the feeling that Gerald's watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. After Vanessa filed the reports, we expected Gerald to either flee or go into hiding. Instead, he made his move. I woke up yesterday to find a notice taped to my front door, a lawsuit. Gerald is suing me for defamation, claiming I've been spreading lies to ruin his reputation. It's absurd, but the timing couldn't be worse. Vanessa was furious when I told her. "This is a classic intimidation tactic," she said. "He's trying to scare you into backing off." I won't lie, it worked for a second. The thought of a legal battle on top of everything else made me sick to my stomach. But then I thought about my mom, tied to that chair in the warehouse, and the fear turned into anger. Later that day, Nora called again. She sounded more desperate than before. "Jeremy, Gerald knows you're building a case against him," she said. "He's panicking. I think he's planning to skip town. Do you know where he might go?" I asked. She hesitated. "I heard him mention a property in Florida once. It's under a fake name, but I don't know much more than that." Vanessa jumped on the lead right away, contacting her law enforcement connections to see if they could trace it. Meanwhile, the police are finally starting to take action. They're gathering more evidence and working on a warrant, but it feels like everything is moving in slow motion. In the meantime, I've been trying to keep my mom's spirits up. She's tough, but I can tell this whole ordeal has shaken her. Last night, she told me something that stuck with me. "Jeremy, don't let him take any more from us," she said. "He's already stolen too much." She's right. Gerald's not just after my money, he's trying to break me. But I won't let him. The fight's far from over, but I'm not giving up. If Gerald thinks he can scare me into silence, he doesn't know who he's dealing with. After Nora's tip about the Florida property, Vanessa and her law enforcement contacts found out that Gerald had been using it as a hideout for years. They tracked down the fake name he used to purchase it, and now it's only a matter of time before they move in. Meanwhile, Gerald's defamation lawsuit is already starting to backfire. Vanessa filed a countersuit, pointing out his fraudulent activities and tying them to the forged documents and the kidnapping. With the evidence piling up, Gerald's own lawyer has started asking for a private meeting to discuss settlement options. As all this unfolded, something unexpected happened. Nora came to see me. In person. When I opened the door, she looked nervous, like she didn't know if I'd slam it in her face. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she said once we sat down. "About how I let Gerald manipulate me, about how I let us fall apart. I was wrong, Jeremy. I see that now. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to tell her it was too late, but another part of me saw how broken she looked. What do you want from me, Nora?" I finally asked. She took a deep breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want to help you make this right. Whatever it takes, I'll do it." I'm still not sure if I can trust her, but she handed over even more evidence. Text messages between her and Gerald that show how he manipulated her and plotted to take control of the money. It's hard to look at, but it's exactly what we needed to strengthen the case. The police have ramped up their efforts, and Vanessa says it won't be long before they arrest Gerald. For the first time in weeks, I feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But I'm not letting my guard down. Gerald's dangerous, and I know he won't go quietly. Here's how it went down. After Nora handed over those incriminating text messages, Vanessa worked with the police to fast-track a warrant. They traced Gerald to his Florida property, just like Nora had mentioned. Yesterday, a SWAT team raided the place and found him hiding out with a fake passport and a suitcase full of cash. Vanessa called me right after it happened. "We got him, Jeremy," she said. "He's in custody." Hearing those words was like a weight lifting off my chest. For weeks, it felt like Gerald was untouchable, always one step ahead. But now, he's finally where he belongs. That doesn't mean it's all over, though. Gerald's lawyers are already scrambling to minimize the charges, and I'm sure he'll pull every dirty trick he can to wiggle out of this. But the evidence against him is overwhelming: fraud, forgery, kidnapping, and now an attempted escape. Vanessa is confident he won't get off easy. As for Nora, she's been cooperating fully with the investigation. Part of me still struggles with the betrayal, but I can see she's trying to make amends. Whether that's enough for me to forgive her, I don't know yet. For now, I'm focusing on putting the pieces of my life back together. My mom is slowly starting to feel safe again, and I'm working with Vanessa to ensure we can regain full control of the assets Gerald tried to steal. This has been the hardest fight of my life, but I'm not backing down until it's finished. With Gerald behind bars, his empire is collapsing. Investigators have uncovered a web of fraudulent schemes stretching back years, and victims are coming out of the woodwork. I'm still working with Vanessa to ensure my family's assets are fully restored, but it's a slow process. Legal battles don't wrap up overnight. Nora has been trying to rebuild her life, too. She moved into a small apartment in town and has been attending therapy. She's been reaching out to me more often, apologizing again and again for everything that happened. "Jeremy, I don't expect you to take me back," she said during one of our conversations. "I just want to fix the damage I caused." I appreciate her honesty, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust her again. She's trying, though, I'll give her that. She's even been helping Vanessa connect with other people Gerald scammed, convincing them to come forward. Meanwhile, I've been focused on my mom. She's been through so much, and I can see how all of this has aged her. I've made it a point to spend more time with her, even if it's just sitting on her porch and drinking coffee together. "Jeremy," she said the other day, "you've handled this better than I ever could have. Your dad would have been proud." Hearing that meant everything to me. The most surprising thing? My neighbors and co-workers have been incredible throughout all of this. When word got out about what Gerald had done, people started offering help, meals, rides, even just someone to talk to. It reminded me that, even in the darkest times, there's still kindness in the world. I'm not sure what the future looks like yet, but for the first time in months, I feel like I'm heading in the right direction. The court process has begun, and Vanessa is confident that Gerald's going to face serious consequences. The charges against him are stacking up: fraud, forgery, kidnapping, and even obstruction of justice. It's satisfying to see him finally being held accountable, but the legal battles are far from over. I'm prepared for a long haul, but at least I'm no longer fighting alone. Nora has been more involved in the process than I expected. She's been testifying against Gerald and has provided even more documentation to help strengthen the case. The investigators told me her cooperation is invaluable, which is bittersweet. I appreciate her efforts, but it doesn't erase the betrayal. We had a long talk last night. She apologized again, not just for what she did, but for how her actions hurt me and my mom. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, tears in her eyes. "But I want you to know I'm truly sorry." I didn't know what to say. I told her I needed more time to figure out how I feel, and she seemed to understand. In other news, I've started returning to work. My crew was incredibly supportive when I explained everything that happened. They even pooled together some money to help cover legal fees, though I didn't need it. It's moments like that that remind me of the kind of people I'm surrounded by. My mom is doing better too. She's still shaken, but her resilience is inspiring. Last weekend, we had a family barbecue, just like old times. For a few hours, it felt like the nightmare of the past few months was finally behind us. The biggest challenge now is learning how to move forward. The lottery win changed everything, some for the better, some for the worse. I'm trying to figure out what my new normal looks like, and it's not easy. Vanessa has been working overtime, gathering every piece of evidence we've collected: Nora's documents, Gerald's fake contracts, the threats he made, and the kidnapping. She told me the prosecution has a solid case, but she also warned me to prepare for Gerald to fight dirty. People like him don't just roll over, she said. He'll try to discredit you, Nora, and anyone else standing against him. Nora has been putting herself on the line to help, and I can see how much it's weighing on her. She's nervous about testifying, but she's determined to do the right thing. Jeremy, I owe it to you, she said. To your mom, too. Gerald used me, but I let him. I need to face that. Her honesty caught me off guard. For all the anger I still feel toward her, I can't deny that she's trying to make amends. On the home front, I've been trying to focus on the positives. My mom's back to her usual self, tough as nails but with a heart of gold. She even joked the other day that Gerald's antics have given her enough drama to last a lifetime. I'm also starting to think about what to do with the lottery money once all this is over. For now, it's mostly tied up in legal fees and untangling Gerald's schemes, but I've been talking to financial advisors about how to secure my mom's future. The trial starts in 2 weeks, and I'm bracing myself for what's to come. It's going to be tough, but I'm ready. I've come too far to back down now. The trial against Gerald has finally started, and let me tell you, it's been a roller coaster. I thought I was prepared for the emotional toll, but sitting in that courtroom and hearing the details of everything he's done laid out so plainly, it's like reliving the nightmare all over again. The prosecution wasted no time painting Gerald as the manipulative con artist he is. They presented evidence of his schemes, starting with the forged documents and phony investments he pushed on me and Nora. Hearing how carefully he planned to steal from us, how methodically he targeted our weaknesses, made my stomach churn. Nora testified on the second day. Watching her walk to the stand, I could see she was terrified, but she didn't back down. She told the court everything, how Gerald had manipulated her, lied to her, and turned her against me. She even admitted her mistakes, taking full responsibility for the role she played. I thought he was helping us, she said, her voice shaking. But he was just using me to get to Jeremy. It was hard to listen to, but I was proud of her for speaking the truth. It couldn't have been easy to lay everything bare in front of a room full of strangers. Of course, Gerald's defense team came prepared. They tried to spin everything, painting me as paranoid and claiming Nora was complicit in the schemes. They even suggested the kidnapping was exaggerated, which made me want to leap out of my seat and yell. But Vanessa warned me this would happen. They're going to try to make you look unstable, she said. Stick to the facts and let the evidence speak for itself. When it was my turn to testify, I focused on telling my story. I talked about how Gerald wormed his way into our lives, how he played on Nora's insecurities and drove a wedge between us, and how he tried to take everything from us, including my mom's safety. I trusted him, I said, my voice steady. I thought he was looking out for our best interests. Instead, he almost destroyed my family. One of the most emotional moments came when my mom testified. Sadie may be small in stature, but she's tough as nails, and she didn't hold back. She talked about the break-in, the forged documents, and being kidnapped. I don't scare easily, she said, her voice strong. But that man made me fear for my life and my son's. Her words hit the courtroom like a punch. Even Gerald looked shaken, though he tried to hide it behind that smug expression of his. The trial isn't over yet, but so far, the prosecution seems to have the upper hand. Between the evidence, the testimonies, and Gerald's shady history, it's clear he's got a lot to answer for. Still, I know better than to get too comfortable. Gerald's lawyers are relentless, and I'm bracing for whatever tricks they have up their sleeves. The courtroom was packed on the final day, victims, reporters, and curious onlookers all there to see how it would end. After weeks of testimonies, cross-examinations, and countless pieces of evidence, The jury was ready to deliver their verdict. I sat between Vanessa and my mom, trying to keep calm, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The prosecution had done an incredible job laying everything out. They didn't just focus on what Gerald did to me and my family. They showed how his crimes stretched far beyond us. Witness after witness came forward to share stories of how Gerald had ruined their lives. Fake investment deals, forged documents, threats to keep people silent. It was clear that Gerald wasn't just a fraud, he was a predator. Nora's testimony was one of the most powerful moments of the trial. She was nervous but resolute as she detailed how Gerald manipulated her, exploiting her insecurities to turn her against me. "He promised me the world," she said, her voice trembling. "But all he wanted was control. I didn't see it at first, and by the time I did, it was too late." Hearing her admit that in front of everyone was hard, but it also felt like a step toward healing, for both of us. When it was my turn to testify, I focused on the facts. I told the court how Gerald ingratiated himself into our lives, pretending to be a friend while plotting to take everything from us. I spoke about the kidnapping, the threats, and the fear of knowing someone so dangerous had targeted my family. "I trusted him," I said. "And he used that trust to destroy everything I'd built. He didn't just take money, he tried to take my peace, my safety, and my family's future." It wasn't easy to relive those moments, but I knew it was necessary. Gerald's defense team was relentless, as expected. They tried to discredit me, suggesting that I was paranoid and overreacting to what they called business disagreements. They even went after Nora, implying that she was a willing accomplice rather than another victim. But Vanessa was ready for them. Every time they tried to spin the narrative, she countered with cold, hard evidence, emails, bank transfers, and testimony from witnesses who had nothing to gain by speaking out. By the time closing arguments rolled around, Gerald's smug confidence was gone. He sat there, pale and silent, as Vanessa delivered her final words. "Gerald believed he was above the law," she said, her voice strong and unwavering. "He thought he could lie, cheat, and threaten his way through life without consequences. Today, you have the power to show him he was wrong." The jury deliberated for 2 days. Those 48 hours felt like an eternity. I barely slept, my mind racing with what-ifs. When the call finally came, Vanessa's voice was calm but firm. "They've reached a verdict," she said. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in. My heart felt like it was about to burst as the foreman stood up to read the decision. "On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. 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 Guilty." Each word felt like a brick being lifted off my chest. Gerald's face didn't betray much emotion as the verdicts were read, but I saw his jaw tighten when the judge announced his sentence: 25 years in prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 15. As Gerald was led out in handcuffs, he glanced back at me. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there too: defeat. For the first time, he didn't look like the smug, untouchable man who had terrorized my life. After the verdict, I hugged my mom tightly. "It's over," she whispered. "You did it, Jeremy. You stood up for our family." Nora approached me cautiously after most people had left. "Thank you for letting me testify," she said softly. "I know I can't undo what happened, but I'm glad we stopped him." I nodded, too drained to say much. "You did the right thing," I said. Now that the trial is over, I'm left with a mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also exhaustion and a lingering sense of disbelief. This chapter of my life has been one of the hardest I've ever faced, but I'm finally ready to close it and move forward. With Gerald behind bars, life is starting to settle into something that feels like normal, or at least a new version of it. The legal process to recover the assets he stole is ongoing, but Vanessa is optimistic. Most of the money he funneled into fake accounts and properties has been frozen, and the court has ordered those funds to be returned to the victims. It's going to take time, but knowing justice has been served makes the waiting easier. In the weeks since the trial ended, I've spent a lot of time reflecting. Winning the lottery felt like a dream come true, but it also revealed some harsh truths about people, about trust, and about myself. I've learned that money doesn't solve problems, it magnifies them. It brings out the best in some people and the worst in others. For my mom, it's brought out her incredible resilience. Sadie has always been tough, but watching her stand up to Gerald and tell her story in court made me prouder than I can put into words. She's been a rock for me through all of this, and I'm making it a priority to ensure she's comfortable and safe moving forward. I've already started the process of setting up a trust for her, so she'll never have to worry about money again. Nora has been working on rebuilding her life too. She's still in therapy and has been attending support groups for people who've been manipulated by toxic relationships. She's apologized to me more times than I can count, and while forgiveness isn't easy, I've decided to let go of my anger. Nora, I told her during one of our recent talks, I'll always care about you. But we can't go back to what we were. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand, Jeremy. I just want you to know I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a better person. I believe her, but I also know that moving forward means creating space for myself to heal and grow. As for me, I've decided to take some time off from work to focus on what's next. I've been meeting with financial advisors to ensure the rest of the lottery money is used wisely. I want to do more than just secure my future. I want to give back to the community that supported me through all of this. One idea I've been toying with is starting a scholarship fund in my dad's name. He didn't live to see me win the lottery, but I know he'd be proud of how I've handled the challenges it brought. I want his legacy to inspire others to work hard and pursue their dreams, no matter how tough things get. I've also started reconnecting with the little things that bring me joy. Last weekend, I went fishing with Carl, something we hadn't done in years. It felt good to sit by the water, swapping stories and laughing like old times. My mom joined us for lunch afterward, and for a moment, it felt like all the chaos Gerald brought into our lives was a distant memory. As I sit here on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I'm reminded of something my mom said recently. Jeremy, you've been through hell, but you never gave up. That's what makes you who you are. She's right. This journey has tested me in ways I never imagined, but it's also shown me the strength I didn't know I had. I'm closing this chapter with gratitude, for the people who stood by me, for the lessons I've learned, and for the chance to rebuild a life that's stronger and more meaningful than before.